Mason, and I am with my dad, Lark Mason, and he is going to share with us some information on cloisonné.
Great. We're going to start out with a few examples. They're all Chinese, but I'm going to first explain what cloisonné is, okay? Do you know what it is?
Is it some kind of enamel process? Type
That's
of enamel?
good. The actual process of using enamels, which are essentially colored minerals in a silica, began very, very early. In fact, I think the Romans actually used this technique. So it's hard to say that the Chinese invented it or did it come from the West. So we happen to have here an example of Ming dynasty cloisonné. They're little wires that separate different colors. You see those wires? And here it happens that the colors have actually broken out. So that we're left with a gouge.
It's almost like a mosaic.
It is almost like a mosaic. And what happened is the different colors were placed within these little wire containers, which are called cloisons, which is where cloisonné comes from. And they would then put it into the kiln, fire it, and it would come out and it would be all bubbly and rough. And they would then polish the surface down and end up with this very smooth surface. And if it were to be gilded, that would be the final process, because you would often apply gold to the metalwork. Now on the back of this dish, the surface the material is actually bronze. So that is what the actual dish itself is made of, is bronze, which is an alloy of several different metals. And then the cloisonné, the crushed up powders that included different minerals, put in, fired, and then polished, and that's what you end up with. So it's basically glass, colored glass applied to a bronze surface. I want you to remember the color, the way that these cloisons are shaped, and how sort of rough these are, which is typical of 16th, 17th century work, as we go forward. Because during the 18th century, and I want you to hold that, they had perfected the technique so that it did not have as nearly rough a surface, uneven a surface, as you found in the 16th, 17th century. And this candlestick actually dates to the 18th century, to the Qinlong period. The colors are very, very carefully separated. And you have a lot of shading, so sort of pale green here to dark green, little red dots. It has a lot more definition. During the 19th century, the surface is a little bit more highly polished.
It's very smooth.
The wires are very thin and very tight with a great amount of detail.
Yeah, I can.
So it's lost, by the 19th century, a lot of the cloisonné work is very technically excellent, but it loses the spontaneity and the sense of connection that you get with the artisan that made it. And often you find, again, motifs such as the lotus on the underside of this, and you find the addition of different kinds of colors.
Were cloisonné objects limited to smaller size things, or are there very large objects?
You can find very large objects that are made of cloisonné. Typically those date from the 19th or 20th century. There were some that were made in the 18th century, but most of those date to the 19th or 20th century. Now, a lot of cloisonné continues to be made. And a lot of cloisonné will actually have marks on the underside.
So this is also read from the top down?
Yes. Top down, that side, this side. And this actually is a mark that says it was made in the Qinlong period, which is the 18th century. And if we look at the decoration here, well, how would you characterize that?
So is that a lotus?
That's a lotus.
And it looks similar to the 18th century design.
It does look similar to the 18th century design. So we're going to compare these two. You can see the two, but what you notice about these is that this is a lot more detailed, very, very fine, narrow, thin cloisons, wire lines that separate the design. And it also incorporates another type of enamel technique, which is called champlevé, which isn't separated by lines, which is here on the top. And we sometimes call this Canton enamel because it was made in Canton. So what we have here, actually, even though this has a mark on the underside, it's not very close in spirit to this design and execution. It's a lot closer in execution to this 19th century version. And in fact, the detail work is even greater than the 19th century version, and that's because this is a 20th century copy.
With dates that say it's from the 18th century.
With dates that say it's from the 18th century.
Tricky.
It is very tricky. So not 18th century. It has a mark that says it was 18th century, but it isn't. And in fact, this dates from the 20th century with an honorific mark meant to pay homage to the earlier period of time, but not intended really to fool anybody.